Sarah Murray. Sarah, we're hearing from Mr. Trump in a new interview. Tell us what he just said.
That's right, Wolf. This is really the first time we've heard from him since he ordered these strikes in Syria, and there have been many questions about what else the administration might be willing to do or where they might draw the line. Listen to what President Trump had to say about that.
We're not going into Syria, but when I see people using horrible, horrible chemical weapons, which they agreed not to use under the Obama administration, but they violated it.
They said they got rid of them.
Hey, look, what I did should have been done by the Obama administration a long time before I did it. And you would have had a much better, I think Syria would be a lot better off right now than it has been.
So really the first indication, Wolf, that we have from President Trump that his view, at least on putting boots on the ground in Syria, does not appear to have evolved, even in the wake of this chemical weapons attack.
Sarah, the White House now scrambling to try to clarify a very controversial remark by Sean Spicer about Syrian gas attacks that took a surprising and offensive turn today. Update our viewers on this.
That's right. So what we heard from Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, earlier today was his attempt to just sort of, I think, frame the cruelty of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. But he leaned on a comparison that many found offensive. Listen to what Sean Spicer said.
We didn't use chemical weapons in World War II. You know, you had someone as despicable as Hitler, who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons. So you have to, if you're Russia, ask yourself: is this a country that you and a regime that you want to align yourself with? When you come to sarin gas, he was not using the gas on his own people the same way that Assad is doing. I mean, there was clearly. I understand your point. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. There was not. He brought him into to the Holocaust Center. I understand that, but I'm saying in the way that Assad used them, where he went into towns, dropped them down to innocent into the middle of towns, it was brought to. So the use of it, and I appreciate the clarification there. That was not the intent.
Now, somewhat predictably today, this comment drew a lot of outrage as people were quick to point out that Hitler gassed millions of Jews, brought them to their death in gas chambers. Now, Sean Spicer moved to clarify that again after the White House briefing, this time in a written statement saying, "In no way was I trying to lessen the horrendous nature of the Holocaust. I was trying to draw a distinction of the tactic of using airplanes to drop chemical weapons on population centers. Any attack on innocent people is reprehensible and inexcusable." Wolf.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Sarah Murray reporting from the White House. Let's talk about all of this and more, the escalating tensions with Russia and Syria and North Korea. Joining us, Leon Panetta. He served as Defense Secretary and CIA Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Wolf.
I want to move on to all those issues, but quickly your reaction to the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's comments about Hitler not using chemical weapons. We know, obviously, that was false.
Well, it's I think, a known danger that you don't compare Hitler to anybody, particularly if you're the White House Press Secretary. When I was Chief of Staff, my guidance to the Press Secretary was just answer the questions and don't embellish. And I think Mr. Spicer has to learn that lesson as well.
Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader in the House, says he should be fired. What do you think?
Well, again, I think he probably needs to have a good talk to make sure that when he does these press briefings, he just sticks to the questions, responds in short sentences, and doesn't embellish. Because when you start getting carried away to try to make a point, you're going to get in trouble. And he's gotten in trouble a number of times. So I just think he needs to discipline himself when he's doing those briefings.
But how many mistakes can you make realistically before your boss, the President of the United States, or you're speaking for the President, says enough is enough?
Well, you know, that's something that obviously the President has to ultimately decide. But, you know, the press secretary is important. He's the one who speaks on behalf of the administration. And when he says the kind of stupid things that he did today, it hurts the administration. It changes the story. And you don't want to change the story. You want to stay focused on what the president did and what he's trying to do in dealing with Russia. That's the story. And this changes it. And that's not good.
Mr. Secretary, I want you to stand by. We have a special interview right now. The White House Press Secretary, Sean Spicer, is joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. Sean, thanks very much for joining us. I know you want to clarify what you said, but why did you even make that comparison to Hitler on gas attacks? As you know, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, many of them with poison gas.
Well, thanks for having me, Wolf. I was obviously trying to make a point about the heinous acts that Assad had made against his own people last week, using chemical weapons and gas. And frankly, I mistakenly used an inappropriate and insensitive reference to the Holocaust, for which, frankly, there is no comparison. And for that, I apologize. It was a mistake to do that. And you know, I appreciate Director Panetta's comments, and we'll keep those in mind.
So tell us who you're apologizing to right now. There are Holocaust survivors out there who were listening to what you said and couldn't believe a spokesman, the press secretary for the President of the United States, would make such a statement. So just specifically, tell us who you want to apologize to.
Well, clearly, you know, anybody who not just suffered in the Holocaust or is a descendant of anybody, but frankly, you know, anyone who was offended by those comments. It's not, as I said, I'm not, you know, in any way standing by them. I was trying to draw a comparison for which there shouldn't have been one. It was insensitive and inappropriate. So I'm not looking to quantify this in any way. It was an attempt to talk about, I should have stayed focused on the Assad regime and the dangers that they have brought to their own people and the terrible atrocities they did, and to drag any other comparison into this was not appropriate.
Well, why make the comparison at all? Why bring Hitler into this?
Well, again, I'm not going to try to quantify it, Wolf. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it. I won't do it again. I think Director Panetta's comments were well received as advice, but it was an attempt to do something that shouldn't have been done, and that's all I can say about it. There really is no explaining it at this point. It's just to say that, especially this week, it was not something that was inappropriate, and it was insensitive. And you know, look, I think I should have stayed focused. The president obviously took decisive action last week to bring an end to the crisis in Syria, take action that hadn't been taken for the last 6 years, and the focus should have stayed on the president's action and not in any type of way of drawing anything into this.
Did you not know, Sean, that there were gas chambers where the Nazis brought Jews and others, gypsies, homosexuals, and others, mostly Jews, to slaughter them in these poison gas chambers at Birkenau, near Auschwitz, and other death camps?
Yes, clearly I'm aware of that. Again, it's as I said initially, and there's no attempt to clarify. The point was to try to talk about the use of aircraft as a means by which Assad was using this to gas his people, but it was a mistake to do that. And again, that's why I should have just stayed on topic, stayed focused on the actions that Assad had taken and the horrible atrocities he had committed against his own people.
Have you spoken to President Trump about your blunder today?
Obviously, it was my blunder, as you put it correctly, and I came out to make sure that we stay focused on what the president's doing and his decisive action. I needed to make sure that I clarified and not was in any way, shape, or form any more of a distraction from the president's decisive action in Syria and the attempts that he's making to destabilize the region and root out ISIS out of Syria. So my goal now and then was to stay focused on Assad, and I should have, and I'll continue to make sure that I stay in my lane when I talk about that.
I want to move on and talk about some other key issues, but can we assume the president encouraged you to come out and apologize?
You can assume that I realized that I had made a mistake, and I did not want to be a distraction to the president's agenda and the action he has taken, and I sought out to make sure that I clarified that.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's an important clarification, especially to those few Holocaust survivors who are still out there right now, and we're obviously very, very shocked to hear what you had to say, but I think it's very important that you came out to formally apologize and correct it. Let's talk about Syria right now. Is it believed, from your perspective, and I know you've been well briefed, that the Russians played a direct role in that initial chemical attack?
There's no consensus within the intelligence community at this time that shows a Russian involvement, but obviously the intelligence community continues to evolve the situation on the ground. The initial consensus, however, it does not lead one to believe that they can say conclusively that there was a Russian involvement.
White House officials are telling CNN they do believe Russia is trying to cover up for Bashar al-Assad's regime and its culpability If this is true, can you really trust Russia in finding some sort of diplomatic solution to Syria?
Well, as I noted today in the briefing, when you look at the countries that are standing with Russia, Syria, North Korea, and Iran, that's not exactly a group of countries that you want to be standing with. All of them are failed states except for Russia. I think Russia is on an island to itself at this point. They are the ones who signed international agreements along with Syria, saying that they would not possess chemical weapons, never mind use them on their own people. And so I think that Russia continues to find itself isolated in this in their stance.
Does the president believe Bashar al-Assad must go?
Sure, but I think the question is, our number one priority is to make sure that we bring stability to the region and root out ISIS out of there. There's no way that I can see a stable and peaceful Syria with Bashar al-Assad in charge.
Bashar al-Assad, I know you've mispronounced his name a few times, but it's Bashar al-Assad. I know the president that you suggested yesterday that President Trump might react if barrel bombs, these awful weapons of mass destruction, were used again. But later you said there was no new policy. Could you clarify precisely where the president stands on the use of barrel bombs if there's another so-called red line?
I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. And I made very clear yesterday that unlike the past administration, we aren't drawing red lines in the sand, that there are a combination of lines that were crossed last week, particularly the use of chemical weapons against babies and children, that really made the president want to make sure he took decisive action, which he did. And the world community, both here at home and around the world, heads of state, responded and with widespread praise because of that.
We need to go, but let me ask you one final question, because, as you know, you're the press secretary for the President of the United States at the White House. This is not the first time your comments from the White House, from the lectern there, have been criticized. Are you worried, Sean, that you have a credibility problem right now?
No, I think this is why I'm here right now, Wolf. You know, I think I clearly, as I said earlier to you, to your audience, when you make a mistake, you own it. My comments today did not reflect the president's, were a distraction from him, and frankly were just misstated, insensitive, and wrong. And I wanted to make sure I clarified them as soon as possible. So I appreciate you having me on, but I think that one of the things that I think is important is we all make mistakes. You've made mistakes, other outlets, me, and everybody does. And we all hopefully have a bit of forgiveness in us. And I hope that people who understand know that when I make a mistake, I'll try to own it, and I would ask people for their forgiveness.
Sean Spicer, it was good of you to come out and apologize to the American people, indeed to people all over the world, for your mistake today. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
Let's get back to Leon Panetta, the former defense secretary, the former CIA director. You just heard him apologize. Not very often you hear a White House official in this new administration being willing to do so, but he was very robust in that apology. He admitted it was a major blunder. Your reaction, Mr. Secretary?
Well, I think it was the right thing to do. I'm glad he did it. It's important to set the record straight and to make clear that that the American people, and particularly those whose families died in the Holocaust, understand that he's apologizing to them. So I'm glad he did it, and hopefully all of us can move on.
Is it over now, you think, as far as this robust apology we just heard from Sean Spicer? Is there anything else he or others in the Trump administration you believe need to do? For example, make a visit over to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., only a few blocks from the White House, and do it at a high level?
Well, it is Passover, and it's probably not a bad thing to recognize the importance of that event for for those that that are part of that faith. But I think right now, look, we all know Washington. This is the kind of story that'll bounce around for a while. But hopefully we'll all refocus on the key issues that this country's facing.
Let's talk about some of those key issues right now. You hear that there's some confusion. There's no consensus in the U.S. intelligence community about whether the Russians actually played a direct role in that chemical weapons attack against those Syrian civilians, including those children. You used to be the CIA director. Walk us through what's probably going on as far as trying to come up with an assessment.
Well, there's no question that they're probably, exhausting every resource that they have in country to try to determine whether or not the Russians were complicit here. It is clear from what Jim Mattis said today that we have very clear evidence that Assad is responsible for that chemical attack, that Syria is responsible for what happened to those innocent men, women, and children. And I think that is the issue that now needs to be brought to the Russians by Secretary Tillerson. As to whether or not we ever develop evidence that might indicate that the Russians knew about what was happening, I think that's going to probably be tough to pin down. But the Russians are at that air base. They knew that there are chemical weapons there. And there certainly is some smoke here. Whether there's flames or not, we'll find out.
Mr. Secretary, there's a lot more for us to discuss. I want to take a quick break. Back with the former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta as North Korea makes new threats against the United States in response to the deployment of American warships moving closer and closer to the Korean Peninsula right now. Mr. Secretary, North Korea warned it's ready to react to any mode of war desired by the U.S. if the U.S. were to make moves toward a preemptive strike. How serious of a threat is this right now?
Well, as we all know, North Korea and the leader of North Korea makes a habit of making those kinds of threats. We understand that in the end, the leader recognizes that if he does anything that involves any kind of attack, that his regime is over. That's a reality. So I think what we're looking at, Wolf, is that, we have this event coming up on April 15th, which is the birthday of the founder of North Korea. And every time these special events take place, the North Koreans usually engage in some kind of provocative act. So I would not be surprised if they use that event in order to either send off a missile or do a nuclear test or do something that is provocative. But as always, I think we have to be prepared to make sure that it doesn't cross that line that we would consider some kind of direct attack either on South Korea or Japan or on the United States.
Tell us a little bit about Kim Jong-un, how unpredictable this young leader of North Korea is. We had, I think, a lot better information about his father, but take us a little bit behind the scenes and what we can anticipate from Kim Jong-un.
Well, he is, without question, very unpredictable, although he comes from a long bloodline of very unpredictable and unstable leaders. He's somebody who obviously has acted against those who he suspects are not loyal to him. He's killed a number of members, not only of his family, but of the military individuals that are close to the leader. He obviously killed or was involved in the killing of his own brother. So we know that he is somebody who obviously is concerned about loyalty. He's tightening his reins on that position. He obviously is trying to maintain very tight control. But I think what I'm concerned about the most is that every leader of North Korea has to understand that at some point you've got to improve the economy of North Korea. You've got to improve the situation with the people of North Korea. And yet every one of these leaders focuses on militarization, on developing missiles, on spending their economic wealth on focusing on military areas as opposed to developing their economy. And I think ultimately they will pay the price for that. One way or the other, this regime cannot last based on what they're doing.
As you know, the president tweeted today that the U.S. will solve the North Korean problem alone if China refuses to help. Do you think a unilateral move against North Korea is the right move, given all the dangers it could potentially develop?
No, I don't think that's the right move. I think that what we need to do right now is to obviously increase our support and strengthen the defenses in South Korea, in Japan, as we have been doing, which I think is important. I think, secondly, we ought to take steps to tighten the sanctions on North Korea. There are sanctions now, but very frankly, they're not as tough as they should be. They're not as tough as the ones we had in Iran. So I think we ought to try to toughen up those sanctions. And then thirdly, continue the pressure on China to try to work with the North Koreans to ultimately agree to some kind of negotiation in the future. That's what we ought to focus on. I think the problem with doing anything unilaterally and suddenly trying to conduct some kind of attack in North Korea, and obviously we have all kinds of plans to look at those kinds of targets. But the problem is that we don't know the consequences. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how effective those kinds of pinpoint attacks can be. And they could produce horrendous consequences with the reaction we could get from North Korea. I mean, we would be in a war on the Korean Peninsula. And so I just think we need to be very careful. We can be tough, but at the same time be careful about how we deal with North Korea.
Leon Panetta, the former defense secretary. Thanks, Mr. Secretary, for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
We're getting a lot of reaction coming into the Situation Room. The reaction to my interview with Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary. You heard his robust apology for his blunder in making that comparison to Hitler. Much more on that and all the day's news right after this. We got the breaking news. You just saw it live here in the Situation Room. Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, a robust apology for him for a major blunder on his part, making a comparison to what's going on in Syria to Hitler, saying that was a big mistake. Listen to what Sean Spicer said to us just a few moments ago.
I was obviously trying to make a point about the heinous acts that Assad had made against his own people last week, using chemical weapons and gas. And frankly, I mistakenly used an inappropriate and insensitive reference to the Holocaust, for which, frankly, there is no comparison. And for that, I apologize. It was a mistake to do that.
All right, let's bring in our experts, our analysts. Abby Phillip, you cover the White House. How often have we heard in this administration a senior official come on television and issue such a formal public apology?
Really incredibly rarely. I mean, I think the only other time I can think of is when Kellyanne Conway went out in the public and she was pitching Ivanka Trump's products, and that situation created an ethics complaint, which is a legal problem for them. In this case, it was Sean Spicer essentially apologizing for something that was almost universally thought to be completely inappropriate, and it was a real apology. It wasn't a if anybody was offended apology. It was a real one, and I think that's pretty significant for this White House that has very publicly said that they don't believe in sort of giving their enemies any more fodder by admitting mistakes.
Let me play another clip, David. This is from the interview with Sean Spicer. Listen to this. Tell us who you're apologizing to right now. There are Holocaust survivors out there who were listening to what you said and couldn't believe a spokesman, the press secretary for the President of the United States, would make such a statement. So just specifically, tell us who you want to apologize to.
Well, clearly, anybody who not just suffered in the Holocaust or is a descendant of anybody, but frankly, anyone who was offended by those comments. It's not, as I said, I'm not, in any way standing by them. I was trying to draw a comparison for which there shouldn't have been one. It was insensitive and inappropriate. So I'm not looking to quantify this in any way. It was an attempt to talk about, I should have stayed focused on the Assad regime and the dangers that they have brought to their own people and the terrible atrocities they did, and to drag any other comparison into this was not appropriate.
But why make the comparison at all? Why bring Hitler into this?
Well, again, I'm not going to try to quantify it. Well, if it was a mistake, I shouldn't have done it. I won't do it again.
That was pretty amazing to hear that kind of robust apology from the White House press secretary. He did the right thing.
He did the right thing. It was a robust apology, and it was important that you pressed him on that point, Wolf, because oftentimes public figures make these general apologies and never specifically say who they're apologizing to. In this case, he clearly owed an apology at least to Holocaust survivors and their families, and also to the American public because they expect better from the press secretary. I think this apology came so swiftly, in part because the White House has become more sensitive to the fact that these verbal gaffes and mistakes are piling up on them and really costing them trust with the American public.
Yeah, it could be part of a new strategy. You make a bad statement, you go out and you try to fix it, you correct it, instead of trying to cover it up and move on.
Yeah, and I think Press Secretary Spicer did that.
And I think for this White House, they've had a number of run-ins with the Holocaust, repeatedly making blunders that force their allies to come to their defense. That gets tiring over time, and at some point, they needed to show their willingness to be contrite, to correct mistakes, and to move forward. It's not something that can be sustained forever, where everyone gives them the benefit of the doubt for making mistakes that are offensive and that are meaningful to people who have families who survived the Holocaust or who themselves survived the Holocaust.
And, for the president, Tara, this hits home. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, Kushner's grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So this is something that really, really hits home to the entire Trump family, and especially at a time like this during these days of Passover.
Absolutely. Not only was it an offensive remark, you should never be comparing the atrocities of one dictator to another. You should never be comparing or trying to make moral equivalence or lack of moral equivalence between the killing of individuals in gas chambers and a chemical attack. These are all horrible, humanitarian, terrible atrocities, situations. And for Sean Spicer to make that comparison, not only is it offensive, it's distracting. There's a lot on the agenda today. There's a G7 summit meeting. There's Rex Tillerson going to Russia. There are issues that the administration wants to be focused on. So I think they wanted to do their cleanup fast, and I think that's smart. I'm all for apologies. I'm all for personal responsibility and self-awareness. And this was one example of the administration doing that when they haven't traditionally done that in the past.
Abby, listen to this other clip. This is from the interview I just did with Sean Spicer. Listen to this. Have you spoken to President Trump about your blunder today?
Obviously, it was my blunder, as you put it correctly, and I came out to make sure that we stay focused on what the president's doing and his decisive action. I needed to make sure that I clarified and not was in any way, shape, or form any more of a distraction from the president's decisive action in Syria and the attempts that he's making to destabilize the region and root out ISIS out of Syria. So my goal now and then was to stay focused on Assad, and I should have, and I'll continue to make sure that I stay in my lane when I talk about that.
I want to move on and talk about some other key issues, but can we assume the president encouraged you to come out and apologize?
You can assume that I realized that I had made a mistake, and I did not want to be a distraction to the president's agenda and the action he has taken, and I sought out to make sure that I clarified that.
So, Abby, I can only assume the president must have been very, very angry.
Yeah, and as you know, Wolf, he watches those briefings. He's a very voracious watcher of television, and it is on every single day. And for that moment to really take off on social media would not have gone unnoticed from this president. And beyond that, as Spicer pointed out in his interview, it is a distraction from a moment when the White House wants to be talking about how the president moved forward on Syria. He did something where his predecessor failed to do. That's the narrative that they want to have. And this moment for Sean Spicer really overtook that. And that's something that the president does not like.
And a press secretary, and I'm a former White House correspondent, you have to have credibility out there, not just with the reporters on the White House beat, but with the American public, indeed people all over the world. That's why I asked him this question, David. Listen to this. As you know, you're the press secretary for the President of the United States at the White House. This is not the first time your comments from the White House, from the lectern there, have been criticized. Are you worried, Sean, that you have a credibility problem right now?
No, I think this is why I'm here right now, Wolf. I think I clearly, as I said earlier to you, to your audience, when you make a mistake, you own it. My comments today did not reflect the president's, were a distraction from him, and frankly were just misstated, insensitive, and wrong. And I wanted to make sure I clarified them as soon as possible. So I appreciate you having me on, but I think that one of the things that I think is important is we all make mistakes. You've made mistakes, other outlets, me, and everybody does. And we all hopefully have a bit of forgiveness in us. And I hope that people who understand know that when I make a mistake, I'll try to own it, and I would ask people for their forgiveness.
That's, as I said before, that you don't hear that very often from this administration asking for forgiveness.
No, it was very robust. He said more than once to you, Wolf, that he did make a mistake. He owned it. He should get credit for that. But he does have a credibility problem, Wolf. Look, today he went out there in the briefing. He mispronounced Bashar al-Assad's name more than once, I think. He referred to Iran as a failed state more than once. Whatever people think about Iran, it's not a failed state. It's a regional power. And he also got into this thing where, as Tara said, he made a comparison between Hitler and the Holocaust and another atrocity, which is never a good idea. They did try and clean it up, but I think they see now that they can't let their war of words get ahead of what they're actually trying to do.
Do they have to do something, Tara, that will underscore this understanding of the enormity of the mistake that the White House press secretary made? For example, in a few weeks, there's a big dinner that the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington is having. They have it every year. It's probably a dinner that at least Sean Spicer might want to attend, if not go to an actual tour of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
I think that's a good point. I think the real issue here is it goes not just to the offensive nature of the comment, but it goes to the expertise and credibility surrounding foreign policy issues. The administration has a number of serious issues on its plate right now, from North Korea nuclear potential missile tests in the upcoming weeks to a safe haven of ISIS in Syria to what they're doing with the Assad regime and a chemical attack that they responded to, and no one's clear in terms of what comes next. These types of issues, when you're mispronouncing foreign leaders' names, when you're making statements about atrocities that aren't historically accurate, to be frank. The Holocaust, millions of people were in gas chambers, so his comments just weren't even accurate. So when you make those kind of gaffes over and over again, apologizing for them is great because it shows that you're aware that you made the mistake, but it goes to your credibility, particularly on foreign policy issues. This is the press secretary at the White House. You have to be you can't really afford mistakes in that role. It's a very important role, and it's very important in terms of not just the domestic audience, but internationally. One general rule, don't make gaffes at the podium at the White House, and, don't make gaffes on your tweets at 3 a.m. If they could just, stick to those, that might help U.S. foreign policy.
Sean Spicer, he did the right thing. He came out and he apologized. That's very significant. Just ahead, new threats and growing tension as U.S. warships approach North Korea. Plus, President Trump's travel tab. How much are those Florida Gulf outings costing American taxpayers? A sharp exchange of threats between the Kim Jong-un regime and President Trump has tension growing on the Korean peninsula right now. CNN's Brian Todd is working the story for us. Brian, North Korea is making new threats as the U.S. warships approach the region.
They certainly are, Wolf. Tonight, we're told U.S. intelligence officials are watching for any signs that North Korea will conduct another nuclear or missile test in the coming days, including the birthday of Kim Jong-un's grandfather this Saturday. Now, this comes as tensions on the Korean peninsula are at their highest levels in years, with an ominous warning coming earlier today from Kim. A stunning new look tonight at the public facade of the brutal North Korean regime. Kim Jong-un, in newly released video, strutting center stage at a gathering of his hand-picked elites, who dutifully applaud the dictator. On state TV, a fawning news anchor narrates the gathering, the Supreme People's Assembly. At the same time Kim Jong-un is conducting this show of political force, Kim's regime is warning America over the deployment of the U.S. aircraft carrier Carl Vinson and its strike group to the waters off the Korean peninsula. Calling it an act of aggression, a regime statement hand-delivered to CNN says, quote, if the U.S. dares to choose a military option, the DPRK is willing and ready to react to any mode of war desired by the U.S.
I think it's North Korea essentially saying, look, we are pursuing nuclear weapons for a reason. This is exactly why. You are the world's most powerful nuclear power. If you dare to strike us, we will strike back.
A U.S. defense official tells CNN the carrier group was sent to patrol near North Korea because of Kim's recent provocations. His missile tests and tests of engines for intercontinental ballistic missiles. Tonight, CNN is learning more specific information about what the U.S. carrier group could do off North Korea's coast if ever ordered to strike. Analysts say the Vincent Strike Group has 2 destroyers and a cruiser with more than 300 combined missile tubes. They carry the same types of Tomahawk missiles the U.S. fired into Syria and could shoot down some North Korean missiles if they're test fired.
The CG-47, the Lake Champlain, this smaller ship on the right, carries over 100 vertical launch missiles. Some of those would be equipped to be able to interdict a shorter or medium range ballistic missile.
Will those American warships be ordered to shoot down North Korean missiles if they're test fired while the carrier group is nearby? Pentagon officials won't comment. But the movement of the warships comes as President Trump tweets North Korea is looking for trouble, and that if China doesn't help, quote, we will solve the problem without them. Experts worry tonight about a point of no return for the tough-talking leaders of the U.S. and North Korea.
The two leaders could indeed be headed for a collision course, essentially a game of chicken. And many worry that once they're on this path, there's no U-turn or left turn or a stop.
And don't look for China to help steer the two leaders off that path, despite President Trump's messages to China, even saying that a Chinese trade deal with the U.S. would be better for Beijing if it helps with North Korea. The Chinese president has made no promises of specific action to rein in Kim Jong-un. Wolf?
Brian, how vulnerable is that U.S. aircraft carrier strike force to a potential North Korean attack if Kim's regime decides to go after it?
Well, Wolf, there are 3 things that Kim could throw at that carrier group. He could throw ballistic missiles, attack planes, and submarines. But one weapons expert tells us the Vincent Strike Group is ready for all 3. He says North Korea's missiles are not sophisticated enough to hit the carrier group before they would be blasted out of the sky. North Korean planes wouldn't stand a chance against the American attack planes on the carrier. And he says the U.S. would deploy attack submarines along with the carrier group, which could detect and take out North Korean subs, which this expert says are very noisy.
Brian Todd reporting for us. Thanks very much, Brian. A final story for us tonight. The cost of President Trump's frequent trips to his Florida resort clearly adding up. He's now on track to spend more on travel in his first year in office than President Obama did in 8 years. Seeing as Tom Foreman has been looking into all of this for us. Tom, the president, heading back to Florida later this week?
Yeah, and at the very time that he's saying to other government agencies, you need to be more frugal, you need to save money, he still appears to be acting like a jet-setting billionaire on the taxpayer's dime. The president keeps taking off and the bills keep piling up. The latest getaway itinerary?
The president plans to spend the Easter holiday in Florida, and he'll return to the White House on Sunday.
Since assuming office, President Trump has spent 6 weekends at his Florida resort, Mar-a-Lago, for a Super Bowl party in early February, a meeting and dinner with the Japanese Prime Minister, a little golf the weekend after that, a little more golf 2 weeks later, still a few more holes in mid-March, and then his meeting in early April with the Chinese president. To be sure, he ordered the strike on Syria during that last visit, and his staff insist he is always working.
And I think the president, wherever he goes, he carries the apparatus to the White House with us. That is just something that happens.
But in just 80 days, Trump's travels have cost taxpayers an estimated $21 million, all while drawing attention to and boosting the value of his private properties. Membership fees at Mar-a-Lago, for example, have already doubled to $200,000. The Secret Service insists it can handle the load of protecting all that travel. But the head of Homeland Security notes agents are pulling long shifts.
We need a larger Secret Service because we need to get some of these people a little bit of time at home with their families.
Law enforcement officials in Florida say they too are spending tens of thousands a day and working their officers as if a hurricane is hit.
Which is 12-hour shifts and canceled vacations. And we're going to use all of our manpower that we have at our fingertips.
And in New York, where First Lady Melania Trump lives, taxpayers are shelling out up to $146,000 a day to secure Trump Tower. The White House says as summer comes on, the president's trips to his Florida resort will decrease, but there are indications that will just mean more visits to other Trump resorts in New Jersey and in Virginia. Wolf?
Tom Foreman reporting for us. Tom, thanks very much. That's it for me. Thanks for watching. Aaron Burnett Out Front starts right now.